Welcome to Bachman's Basement, the show where we dig into the dark, strange, and unforgettable corners of Stephen King's work. I'm Chris Patton.
And I'm Chris Clawson.
And in each episode, we take on a different book, story, or adaptation, exploring not just the plot, but the impact, legacy, and conversation around it. How are you doing today, Chris?
I'm doing pretty well. I'm excited.
Excited. This is the first episode, so a little introduction about what the show is going to be and how it kind of started. Chris and I met playing Overwatch on Xbox and soon discovered our love of Stephen King kind of interconnects and intertwines. And we were thinking about, what can we do that would be a little different? And some of that was taking some of the lesser talked about, or it's kind of the idea of Bachman's Basement is taking some of the smaller books or things that aren't as talked about in Stephen King's works and working through them. That's not saying that we won't hit on some of the major ones that everyone else has talked about a bazillion times, but more like a book club for fun, since we were spending a couple hours talking about old Stephen King in Xbox Live anyways. And then that's kind of how this show started. Chris, if you want to talk a little bit about yourself, maybe talk about how you fell in love with Stephen King, some of your favorite works of his, and maybe the first one you ever read.
Yeah, so I grew up in a family of readers, and my uncle was a huge Stephen King fan. I remember being a kid, seeing that bookshelf when I visit my aunt and uncle, just full of Stephen King books, and not having read any of his books when I was a kid, I was just fascinated with, the book covers, and I just thought it was really cool. Fast forward to, adulthood, and I was talking to my uncle, and I was like, what Stephen King book would be a good one to start with? He recommended Salem's Lot. So that was my introduction. But at this point, I've read pretty much everything that he's written. And I don't know if you'd call me a super fan, but he's one of my favorite authors for sure.
Yeah, you're a little better on keeping up with everything that he puts out than I am, for sure. But you also give me great recommendations, so I'm very thankful for that. I'm kind of along here for the ride. I'm going to give you more of the expert title in this. I'm more of the color guy coming into the show, guiding people through this. And for this particular book, Rage, I had read this years and years ago. It's the first time I've kind of came back to it. And I did listen to the audio version, which is on Internet Archive. So if anyone out there has potentially never read this book, just has an interest about it, it does kind of have a lore around it. It is one of the infamous banned books, which we'll get into a little bit later. But it is available to listen to for free on Internet Archive. I think you can also read it there as well if you'd rather have that experience.
Also, just as a note, if you can find a copy of the Bachman books, it's included in that as well. Obviously, that's not in print right now, but you can find that at most used bookstores.
Most used bookstores, Goodwill, pretty much anywhere where you can get a book for under. Can you get a book for under $1 anymore? Or is that out the window nowadays?
I don't know about $1, but you could find you could definitely get your hands on it if you're interested.
Yes, for sure. A little bit about myself, kind of similar situation with the exception my mom is still a massive Stephen King fan, probably more than anyone I've ever known besides Chris and maybe his uncle, based on what he's telling me. But it's the same kind of thing. I remember, going into a room and seeing the book cover and it kind of standing out. And then I guess I kind of consumed a lot of the movies first growing up, even as a kid, like 7 or 8, seeing Christine and, It and The Shining and those classics. And then I got around, 12 or 13, started getting into more big boy books. There was just stacks of them around the house. Lots of Stephen King, lots of V.C. Andrews in my house growing up, and in a house where we didn't have cable. You get like 4 channels. You can either stay up late watching MASH that would come on at 1 o'clock on TBS, or you could crack open a book. So I spent a lot of time as someone who does not sleep and really hasn't ever, even as a teen, late at night, which Chris can attest to this based on our time difference and how late we play video games. But yeah, that's kind of where my love for Stephen King kind of starts. I'd say around middle school, just as a brief explanation of how I got into it, but it was for sure the movies for me first, and then the novels and short stories and books and all the other great things that Stephen King has done over his giant career.
I would definitely agree with you that my introduction, besides seeing the books at my uncle's house, definitely saw some of the movies as a kid. I remember my mom introducing me to the 1977 or 79 movie Carrie, the Brian De Palma film, and I just remember thinking, oh, this movie's not scary until that end scene, and that really hooked me, for sure. Like, yeah.
Yeah, and for any young listeners out there, Chris and I are a product of a different time where people watched horror movies with their kids when they were like 8,
Yeah.
8 or 9. So it's a little different nowadays. Hopefully things have gotten a bit better. But yeah, my mom started me off a little light. We went with Christine, then Carrie, then into some of the deeper things. And we'll probably talk about this more in detail, but I remember the first like Stephen King thing that scared me film wise was specifically it, but it wasn't a lot of the other parts that scare people. We had it on the double VHS, and there's a section in that double VHS, much like old like double disc video games, like a PlayStation 2 Final Fantasy or Metal Gear Solid, where you'd have to flip from one tape to the other. And in that section, there's a black and white picture book where Pennywise is just going nuts in this photo, moving around. It's a still photo of the town, but he's just going crazy. And for whatever reason, I had nightmares about that for 2 or 3 weeks. I was off the horror films, and every time I see it still, it kind of unsettles you.
Yeah, I definitely know what you're talking about. And they do that a little bit in the newer films as well. But anyway, we're getting off track with where we're going, but
you're getting off track to get on track. So we'll get back on track right here, right? We're going to start way back in 1977. This is when this book was published, though it was written, and I didn't know this, when Stephen King was a teenager. So
right.
We're going to say
mid to late 60s. I think he was maybe a teenager or a very young adult in college.
Yeah.
Somewhere.
So when this comes out, it gets published in 77. He kind of just didn't touch it for a while. And then it becomes part of the Bachman books collected works later on, which is where most people would see this, though there are single copies of this, if I'm not mistaken. Right, Chris?
Yeah. I mean, it was released as a paperback novel, obviously, under the Bachman name, since, as we're going to talk about later, he wrote under a pseudonym.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that pseudonym, I guess. It's probably a good place to start. For those out there who are just more familiar, I guess, with Stephen King and maybe haven't touched any of this Bachman stuff, what do you think some of the reasoning is for him gearing some of these? Rage I think is a great one to start with, of something that should be published under a different name.
Definitely.
As we get into this, but
I would say that King, from what I've learned just from him writing and interviews that I've watched, him talking about that he had so many ideas and so many books already written by the time he became a successful published author. And his publisher at the time was telling him, you can only release 1 or 2 books a year under your name. You don't want to flood the market. And he was just not happy with that. So he thought to himself, if I could just write under another name, I can release these other books that maybe don't quite have the same voice as my Stephen King books, but also I feel are really good stories. Kind of gave him an outlet, I think, for some darker insights.
Yeah, and one thing that you'll kind of notice the link of some of the earlier books, the Bachman books, with things like Rage, The Long Walk, Road Work, I'm probably The Running Man. They're all kind of looks at the dark side of society and kind of the like the forgettable populace to some extent, the poor.
Definitely.
Anti-authoritarian, where you have more of like Stephen King's horror books. There's a lot of mysticism and spirituality is probably not the best word, but like, it ties into more things of the noir. Like you got your ghost books, you got your vampire books, you got your demons from hell that turn into giant spider books. It's
Definitely.
It's a very different vibe.
King kind of established himself with his name as like a mainstream, easily digestible writer versus the Bachman books that he wrote under being a little more, I wouldn't say they still have his voice, and that also becomes clear because that's why somebody figured out that it was him writing under that name, because they saw the correlation, the same writing style.
And that takes us to Rage, which I think is Stephen King's only banned book, unless that's been updated this year, right? This is the one.
Yeah, as far as I know, and strangely enough, I mean, it wasn't banned by anybody else. It was banned by King himself. He chose to take it out of print due to the controversy of real life school shootings and how the copy of his book was found in some of those circumstances.
Right, and this dates back even to the 80s. So if we're not going to go into a lot of details on these school shootings or anything, that's not what the show is about. We're starting with this because it is the earliest Bachman work, and it is one of the ones that's probably least talked about. And as we get into it, there's various reasons for that, because it's easily not his best work either, if we're being completely honest. But if you want to check that stuff out, if you like the macabre, or just news stories and clippings, that is all available. If you look up the Wikipedia, there's a list of every instance of there was a school shooting, and then he had either read the perpetrator had either read Rage, or it was found in his locker. There was some sort of association to it. But that went on for quite a while. He takes this out of print in '97, which would have followed Columbine, where there was more of an open eye in the media of this kind of thing, right? And the coverage of Columbine, and Columbine being probably still to this day the most famous of the school shootings, for better or for worse. Not that there's a good way to be famous in that kind of thing, but
infamous.
And infamous, yes, that is the term that we're probably looking for, or I'm probably looking for there. But that kind of leads us into the book. So let's get this thing started, man. Are you ready to talk about Rage?
Definitely. I mean, it's one of those, like, I personally love every Stephen King story that I've read, and they just fall under different degrees of greatness for me personally. And this one is lower on that scale, but not because it's not well written, but mostly just I feel like it's just not as strong of a story. It's worth reading, but I don't know, like that. That's just kind of my thought.
And it's kind of like, it's interesting knowing that he started this book so young, right? I mean, obviously, if he started it as a teen or a young adult headed into college, he has famously said in general, he described this book as a kid's book written by a kid for kids about kids, because it is written and narrated kind of from the perspective of our main character, Charlie Decker, who we're going to get into here.
Yeah, something that I've seen King say is that write what you know, and I feel like he definitely does that. Like, he writes in every period of his writing career. He's not that he doesn't go back and write young characters, but you would notice that if you see that he writes a lot of people that are closer to his age and his experiences. And so this definitely, being a young man, he would definitely have the insight there, the teen angst, which this book obviously is
And this book is kind of a predecessor to Carrie, right? So you get some of the same teen angst and situations and characters that you get in this book, the same kind of high school characters, or Arnie Cunningham, for instance.
Yeah.
You do get a little bit of that, and you get to see. It's kind of cool to look at it from this perspective of like what Rage is to what how well those characters are fleshed out.
Right. This is early King, him still finding his voice, and I mean, he's certainly on display here. He knows what he's doing, but he hasn't quite reached the height of his power just yet as a writer.
So, I mean, I guess I'll get into the plot a little bit. This is just gonna be a quick walkthrough for everyone, and then we'll go into some further discussion. But yeah, so the book itself kind of starts out with Charlie just giving a description about what's going on in his life about school. It gets called into the principal's office, and we find out that there is an event that happened, an altercation with one of his teachers, a physical altercation with one of his teachers, that has put him in a situation where he is going to be sent potentially to what I'm assuming is a military school in the way the school's named. They don't ever really go into detail. Either a military school or some sort of psych ward type school, if he can't keep his crap together, so to speak, in which he then basically tells the principal to go fuck himself.
Right. That's the intro. So this kid has already got issues right from the onset.
And he starts getting it on, which is the original title of the book that we talked about previously. I think maybe it was before when I botched the intro. Maybe you guys will get a blooper on episode 100 or whatever of this, but yeah, getting it on. So for him, getting it on is talking about banging the principal's wife. Principal's like, okay, whatever, you're done. Go home. Sends him home. In today's society, this would never happen, Chris, where a kid has this kind of outburst on a principal and just gets sent home with no security detail. Just get your stuff out of your locker and leave at your own leisure.
Right. Yeah, he would be escorted out, and likely possibly even by authorities.
So instead, what our hero here, or anti-hero here, tends to do, or does, I should say, is he goes to his locker, he retrieves a pistol, he walks into the classroom and shoots his teacher and shuts the door, and everyone sits in silence at what they have just seen. Mr. Charlie Decker. And that is really the start of the book. The rest of the book is very much, and I kind of said this before we started the show, it is a grittier Breakfast Club. It's Breakfast Club before the Breakfast Club. It is a bunch of kids talking about their lives under threat of a gun, so it's a little different. Talking about their lives, telling various stories, and that is where the actual interesting parts of the book come into play. It is more about your teenage years, the different things everyone's going from, whether you're, the prettiest girl in the class, whether you're the Bible thumper in the class, whether you're the really poor kid whose mom won't buy him clothes, whether you're the jock. It hits all of these same elements as the Breakfast Club.
That's
to some extent.
Just to kind of, intervene there, I would say that's maybe Stephen King's strongest quality as a writer, is that he knows how to write believable characters that you can relate to. And every one of these characters in the book, that they're very memorable and they feel like real people. And like, it kind of takes you back to that time, not in the literal sense, but it takes you back to your own time in high school, and like that that would be my sort of
and that's what gives it the feel of, and you can tell he's writing it young, because that's what it has, that anger behind it. There's a difference between when you're 17 to when you're 37, right? How you feel about things, how you go about talking to people or thinking about the world in general. And this is right. And you can tell it in the writing and the way some of the things are, even some of the weird things that you would think was hot in the 60s that come through, such as like accidentally seeing a girl's white cotton panties, etc. It's very much there. You can see his early King work, still well written, but definitely there. So continuing the plot, everyone goes through their stories, Chris, and we'll talk about each of the characters and kind of what their stories are and what they detail, just to give a big plot overview first before we dig into the meat of this thing. On the outside, police are surrounding the building. We have teachers. We have we have the media showing up.
Also, right after Charlie kills the algebra teacher, another teacher comes down the hall and pokes his head in the classroom, and Charlie ends up shooting him as well. And so those are the only two people that are shot in the book. And then he has somebody lock the door, and then that's back to the story.
Yes, and I did forget to mention he does set a fire in his locker, which cues the fire alarm, which is why this teacher pokes his head in to begin with. So yeah, thanks for grabbing that. So he does end up killing two people that we know of in the book, and from there on out, as far as a school shooting story goes, if you've never read this book and you're looking for a big kind of crazy story, that's it. It's those two, and the rest of it is, like I said, more about these the lives of these kids. And so we have the local sheriff. We have his therapist they're sending him to after the attack.
Right.
And
they send him in at some point, and then he talks to Charlie through the speaker system. They have a conversation back and forth.
So, which I thought was really cool. So throughout this entire book, anytime an authority figure comes over, they're coming over through an intercom. And this is an old school intercom where there is like you can literally hear the cut on, cut off. He talks about hearing a chain clink, and then the intercom cuts on, and then the conversation starts. So it's almost this voice of the devil or God in his head talking to him from above. It's kind of got that kind of theme to it, and it's kind of you always being the littler person.
It's the voice of authority, and Charlie continues to put them in their place and say, "You're not in control of this situation. I'm in control."
Which is hilarious in some of these conversations. And so that's the kind of the outset of the whole book, really. That's the plot. That's
strangely, as with a plot point, or with a plot set up like a school shooting, you would not think that there would be much humor in that, but strangely enough, the story actually has quite a lot of humor and emotional depth. As we get to know all these different characters, the various kids in the classroom and their backstories.
So, I mean, I think the easiest way to kind of dig into this one, because it is because we're kind of already getting into the themes of what this is. Obviously, the setting of a school is creepy in itself, and King knew that, and that's why he went for it. I don't know that there was anything else really like this out there at the time when he wrote this book.
I don't either. I don't even know if school shootings were a thing in the 60s. It's strange. Like, I feel like he wrote this as an allegory for how difficult it is, for a lot of people while they're growing up and in high school.
Yeah, and it's in a sense of a school shooting, this is more like he's taking on authority, so he's killing authority, which still don't do that, anyone who's listening to this. Yeah. But it isn't really when you hear the term school shooting in 2025, it's not what you think of as a school shooting, other than it happens at a school, right? So geographical location, I guess. But let's talk a little bit of why Charlie Decker has done this. So Charlie Decker has the most stories as a character would in this situation, where the class, they're in shock of what happened. They are sitting at their desk. Nothing has changed. He's now the teacher, I guess, for lack of a better term. He's sitting at the head of the desk. Teacher is laid out dead in the front of the desk, and he's holding court, and he's talking about how they got here. And start out, he kind of is talking about his dad. Am I right on this, Chris?
Yeah, I'd say that that's kind of where the story, Charlie's past, kind of begins, is with a camping trip with his dad when he was about 10 years younger. So that he's hearing his dad talk to his friends outside by the fire while he's trying to quietly come out of the tent and go take a piss, and hearing his dad, just the way he's talking about possessing his mom and the violence that he would do if she doesn't fall in line and things like that.
Yeah, so that whole campfire scene is something that I think that a lot of younger kids have probably ran into in their lives, for better or worse, if you're around drunken males. So it's a bunch of drunk guys around the fire. It's all hunting buddies. He's on this hunting trip with his father and his drunk friends. Think the end of Deer Hunter, if you want a movie comparison. And they're talking about a particular woman in town that had cheated on her husband and what they would do if their wife was to cheat on them. And Charlie Decker's father is very descriptive in what he would do, talking about cutting off the tip of her nose to make her so unappealing to everyone that no one would ever want to touch her again. And this sticks in young Charlie's head as he's laying in the tent hearing all this. He has to pee. He doesn't want to pee himself because that would be a whole nother altercation with his father, who's a former military of some sort. I don't remember the exact branch from the book. I didn't take that detailed level of notes. He finally goes out and pee. His dad's like, or he comes out and he pees, and it's never really, he doesn't say anything. It's not addressed, but it obviously set with him, and it comes back up later in the story.
It seems like his dad kind of keeps a straight face, but is also almost alluded to that his dad's like, I wonder how much of what I was just saying that he heard, sort of thing.
And the answer to that was all of it.
Yeah.
So moving forward, I believe he tells there's some, back and forth between him and who's kind of the bad guy in this book for no reason whatsoever. And we'll get into his character a bit here, Ted Jones. So you get a little back and forth with Ted Jones. Ted Jones is your
standard.
He's your popular kid. So if you're going to compare this to Breakfast Club, right? He is Emilio Estevez.
Yeah.
He is your Emilio Estevez. He's popular. He's privileged, comes from good stock, as some might say. And, if Charlie didn't have that gun, things may have went a little different for old Charlie here. But Charlie does have that gun, and that gun keeps everyone in line. And Ted Jones is really set up as the only character here that will not get real about who they are. And so when it comes into term of what getting it on really means, and getting it on to Charlie is being truthful, being honest, being anti-authoritative, being having something to say is what I gathered from this. But I'd be curious to hear what your take is on getting it on.
Yeah, I thought about that a lot as I was reading the book, because it's not a term that, as far as I know, was ever popular. I don't think it was used by kids in the 60s or any other time. Yeah, I would just say that it's doing whatever is, that the thing that's maybe in your head that you shouldn't do, but you're going to do that anyway, instead of just like thinking about the wrong thing, but not acting on it. I don't know.
We get a little bit of background of Charlie talking about his stomach issues, always being queasy, always nervous when he has these big emotional these big emotional moments, big angry moments, I should say, like shooting his teacher. I don't want to say like it's more of zen for him, and then as soon as it's over, he feels sick at his stomach. He's disgusted, not necessarily at himself, but he definitely talks about this throughout the story about how he just has a very terrible stomach, right?
Something just as a kind of something that I remember specifically that didn't ring true for me was right after the shooting, although everyone is like shocked, it seems like everybody just kind of like realizes, oh, I'm not in danger. He's not going to shoot me. All I have to do is just sit here and what happens next, sort of thing. And it's like people sort of fall in line and they go, well, what are we doing here then? And that's kind of.
Yeah, and that's almost a look at school in general. When you think about school, everything has to be done in a certain order, going back to the day that you walk into an elementary school, right? Like everyone walk in a single file line, everyone go to this class at this time, so you're almost trained that everything should happen in this specific order, this specific way. And then this is just throwing a giant wrench into that.
So they're like, well, you're in charge, Charlie. So what are we doing here?
Yeah, what's going on? And to follow that up, we get a little more detail about what happened in the original altercation, which is he beat his chemistry teacher within an inch of his life with, I can't remember what it was, a pipe, right?
Like a lead pipe or something.
In the middle of class. So people kind of already know that Charlie's a little unhinged and they just watched him shoot two people. So there is a little bit of like, there's a fall in line, but there is also uneasiness around this character already, right? Like they've seen him commit a crime already, like a pretty bad one, which is crazy to think about. But in the 60s, if you're a kid, that might you might just go to military school as opposed to having any kind of real punishment handed down to you. But that sets up, he goes through some other stories. The next story specifically about his dad is him breaking storm glass windows as a kid and getting hit for the first time. Right. Really, really getting hit, and his mother coming out and giving him this love. So this becomes very, very much mama's boy. Not mama's boy in a bad way, but like his mother is very, very protective when she comes out and threatens to leave, never come back, and all that. You get all of that. But in Charlie's memory, he just remembers how cold his dad was to him in that moment. And you get kind of the buildup of like things at home for Charlie's not great. His dad and his relationship, not close at all.
Certainly every young man, that has a father in the house, it seems like at least up to a point, is looking to be their dad, or their dad is their model for how to do life. And I feel like, that's certainly a jumping on point for why Charlie's so disturbed.
And so Charlie starts talking to some of the other class members here. And I guess the first one to really open up as Charlie is telling these stories about his life is Sandra Cross. And she more talks about an uncomfortable encounter that she had with an authority figure or a teacher. I can't remember if it was a teacher or
an older man
in general who was just super oogling her and making her feel very, very, very uncomfortable. And she's the first one that opens up. That's pretty much her story, is just being objectified, right? And I think it's an easy one to open up with because as we go, these stories get a little crazier and crazier for each
kid.
Yeah,
as we go along.
And I don't have the characters in order. I apologize for that. So if I get anything out of order, Chris, let me know. We do have Irma Bates, who actually Irma would not be next, right? I think.
Yeah, I can't remember the exact order of the stories and how they're unfolding in the story, but each of these young people open up throughout the story, and it just kind of adds to their oneness as a class.
Irma Bates specifically, her thing is that
Each other as
Irma Bates, not to go back to Breakfast Club, but I will here. I will. She is the Molly Ringwald character here. She's she's supposed to be perfect, you know.
Right.
Her parents expect a greatness out of her. She is also, I believe, the yeah. So her thing is more. No one's perfect, right? So that's kind of more of her story, and shows her just kind of crushing what her parents think about her, like crushing expectations of what's put on kids by their families, like why she feels that way. So it's more of that of her talking about like, hey, I'm not perfect, no one's perfect, and being pressured to be this great at school or anything else I do is kind of overwhelming. So that's kind of, we're starting out with some of the smaller ones, and then we'll get into some of the bigger ones.
Something with Irma too that she kind of opens up about is that because she dated Ted for a time, and that she was interested in Charlie, but Charlie never reciprocated that, or he never took notice that she was interested in him. And then he kind of, it's the way that King writes it is like, she's talking about that, and Charlie's realizing that in his own head. He's like, oh wow, things could have been a whole lot different if I would have noticed, because she's awesome.
Yeah, he's like scale of 1 to 10 would bang.
Yeah.
Maybe, because we'll talk about Charlie a little later on. We get to some more of his stories. Yeah, so we get Dawn Grace is another character. She shares a story about her brother being institutionalized. It's a family secret. No one talks about. This brother kind of disappears. It's more about mental illness, shame, that kind of thing. So it's not as crazy of a story as some of the other ones, but it is, each one of these little stories, there's little things in them that are great in their own right. And I think they're important to talk about all of these characters, because while Charlie is the main character, this book is kind of written in the sense of the character Charlie is writing it as like a memoir, right? From wherever he's located at. And he's telling all these stories in detail that as he recollects them. And that's what I gather from that. And the only time it shows up really where you know that that's the case is when he talks about seeing a commercial with a lock. And we'll get into the story of the lock later on. But then you realize okay, he is the narrator. He's telling the story. Because at first, the way it's written, it's kind of vague of like who's telling the story. It could be Charlie. It could be Ted. It could be any one of these kids technically.
We're kind of focused on Charlie at first, and it's like the story's happening, but it's not specifically Charlie's voice.
Right. It does a good job of it's Charlie's voice, but it's in the moment. And that's like one of the only times that it kind of pops out where it's like, oh, this is like he's thinking about this as a past event specifically. And yeah, we'll get to there. I know I'm kind of jumping around, but this one ended up being a lot tougher than I thought it was going to be, just because of the sheer amount of character stories for each character.
There's character stories, and also there's little details, and King does that really well, where it's like you'll be reading along, like when he goes to set the fire in his locker right before the shooting, he removes the lock from his locker and puts that in the shirt pocket. And that, like, you don't think much of it as you're reading that, but it comes in very important later in the story. And it's little things like that I appreciate that King's always doing, setting up these little tidbits that you're like, oh, I didn't even think about that. And then, yeah. So
So we get Cheryl Hempel. She confesses this very disturbing sexual encounter at a summer camp, and that theme kind of being adolescent sexuality, trauma, and then holding that all in as a secret as a teen, right? We have John Vance, who just hates his teachers. Basically, he gets humiliated by them. He's almost in the same camp as Charlie as far as his hatred for authority, and that plays into some of the end of this, as he's someone that doesn't like Ted as well. There's a lot of people in this that don't like poor Ted. I will say that.
You say poor Ted, like quote unquote, but I mean,
it's how people turn on someone, though. You know what I mean? Like, yeah,
I mean, Ted's that kid that's got it all. I mean, he's good looking, he's athletic, life seems pretty easy, at least from the outside looking in.
So what I will say about Ted is they do not do a good enough job for me as an adult of making me hate Ted as a person.
Right. Like that kid, you went to school at any point in time, you knew a kid like this, the popular, good looking kid that it just seems like, man, I wish that I could be that popular and good looking, because it seems like a way better situation, but
yes. But usually, when you're making this protagonist, you're making like a Biff, for instance.
Right. And Ted's not that at all. Yeah,
you're usually making him kind of a terrible person, and Ted's not really. They don't build him up enough to make you hate him the way that this class seems to hate him.
Right. It's more just like, I think it's just he's kind of, the perception is that he's kind of quietly looks down on people, but that he's not necessarily a dick to anyone. He's just kind of comes off pompous, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. Which, I mean, still, like, in the gravity of the situation and how this book ends up coming out, it's kind of, I wish they would have fleshed that out a little bit better. So I'm going to take the first shot at early Stephen King's writing here. If you want me to hate Ted, you got to flesh it out. You got to flesh it out a little bit more than he's a good-looking, popular kid. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
That's not a reason to hate someone. Even when I was in high school, I didn't really hate those guys.
Right.
The people that you hated were the ones that were like bullies or popular assholes. Which everyone's high school experience is different. Like I didn't run into as much bullying as I know some others did. But yeah, like it's kind of the way that they set it up in this book. It's kind of like, oh, well, God forbid you be handsome in this town. Like,
right.
It must be a lot of uggos in this town. Is what I'm getting at. Grace Stammer, she recalls basically just her parents fighting and essentially setting up for a divorce. So that's kind of what Grace is going through. Ellen Simple, she talks about being feeling invisible and being overlooked by both her peers, the students around her, and adults, right? And Ellen is also, if I'm not mistaken, she's the holier than thou character here.
Right.
And if I'm not mistaken, is it her and Cheryl or her and Sandra?
And that's something that King does, is like he builds a huge cast of characters, and then there's a lot of exposition, and sometimes it's hard to remember, and maybe that's our fault for not doing as a detailed enough research on, even though we just read or listened to this. But it's like
there's so many
pieces.
Let me verify who the two people fighting are, because it is a major plot point. Well, let's see here. Doing it live. because I cannot remember if it was Cheryl. It is either Cheryl or it is Irma, and I don't remember exactly who.
There's two girls that end up fighting.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
So we're looking it up. It's Sandra Cross and Grace Stanner. So I was wrong. It was not. It's Grace Stanner. So Grace is the one that basically Grace thinks that Sandra's a whore.
Right.
And basically Charlie calls them to the front of the classroom and they do power slap. So if you ever saw UFC power slap, he's like, you guys can slap each other and yell insults. So they kind of do a rap battle of insults here where Grace is not as well equipped as Sandra, as someone who does not curse and is more holier than thou and kind of leans more into that as a character. But she gets slapped down by Sandra pretty hard. They slap the crap out of each other for a while. This goes on for a while. But what you realize here is that they're getting it out of their system almost.
Yeah, it's a catharsis. Like this whole story is kind of a catharsis of the high school experience, like kind of attacking it from every point and like giving you, doesn't matter who you are and everybody has problems when they're in high school.
Yeah, and you just see this is kind of just building on that theme of like they're in this classroom, they're stuck there, they don't have any there's nowhere to go, and everyone's making these confessions, and it's just building and building and building all of this anger, not necessarily towards one another. In this case, it is towards one another, but it kind of shows you the jealousy and pent up anger and the strange group dynamic that Charlie is created, and while getting it on, right?
Right.
So
that's sort of like a major theme of this, obviously, that it's that every kid in that classroom has resentment, and that you slowly find out throughout the story that they all sort of realize that they're alike, other than our boy Ted.
Golden child. Yeah, so Ted, his big thing is like he is waiting, absolutely waiting for Charlie to slip up, make one mistake, he's going to rush him. He says this openly.
Yeah.
Charlie's main story is that he hooks up with one of the girls in this classroom, in which is part of her story of having sex with Ted after he kicks some dude's ass at a roller skating rink. That's not a roller skating rink. It's like so I didn't understand. Were they dancing or were they roller skating? Maybe I need to go back and reread that.
I took it like it was a roller skating rink. It was something like that. It was a after school activity that was popular in that time. And for this day and age, maybe
they were allowed to drink. They were allowed to drink at this event, which seems like a terrible idea. Have a bunch of fucking teenagers drunk roller skating.
Yeah.
Anyways, Ted beats the crap out of this guy, has sex with this female character, and then later on she's like, I was kind of glad I got it out of the way.
Right, that was Sandra, right?
Sandra,
yeah.
Yes, she was the one. So like, I'm kind of glad I got it out of the way.
And then Sandra proceeds to not necessarily intentionally humiliate Ted, but she does, in that she goes on to have sex with somebody else and realizes how inept Ted was.
Well, kind of, because the person that she was trying to have sex with couldn't really get it in, and for lack of a better term, blew it out sooner than should have. But there was this mysterious guy she met. He was like greasy, from like the way that they describe it is like perfect Stephen King, right? Like she went after the bad boy basically in this bar. He's like greasy with a pizza grease, and the way that it's described is not anything attractive. But for her, having this encounter was like her actual. She basically talks about having her first orgasm. So there's no other way for me to really put it other than
it's
that.
the comparison of like, her first experience.
Well, she does compare size with Ted.
Right, but she also compares Ted being like probably that was maybe his first time having sex as well. And her first time, and then when she has sex with this other guy from the bar, he's more experienced, and so she
attempts to have sex because they don't ever actually have sex.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, exactly.
That's why I was like, I don't know, it wasn't that bad for your boy Ted out here.
No, Ted didn't necessarily rape her. No, he just kind of blew it before he even got.
No, I mean, no, Ted got it in. The other guy is the one who came up a little short from what I remember from the story. But by coming up short, Sandra still got off, which is kind of the weird story there. Like, she wasn't really attracted to Ted. She just wanted to get it out of the way, get virginity out of the way, which is the thing that I think a lot of teenagers go through of like, man, like I can just do this. So,
right. I don't want to be the last one. I remember that as being a teenager and my friends having sex, and then it was like, oh, I'm going to be the last one. That's a common, I'm sure, teenage worry.
And this leads back to our main character, Charlie. And Charlie's first experience with sex after she tells the story. Charlie feels inclined to tell his story, right? You show me yours, I'll show you mine.
Yeah.
Charlie's story is that he goes with his friend.
Ends up like they get a bunch of drugs, or they go
get some weed and listen to some bluegrass at the drug dealer's house, and then they go to a party with his friend's older brother. And,
right, and
Charlie
gets he gets really high, and then she takes him out of the party, and they go out into the bushes outside. And he's too high to enjoy himself.
He's too high. He's drunk, too high, and making out with this girl. And clearly, things were about to happen for Charlie. And just the old soldier wouldn't stand to attention, and it makes him question whether or not he's gay. It makes him question a lot of things. And you get some actual pretty good Stephen King writing here about what that can make you feel like as a male, probably from personal experience of Stephen King getting too high.
And again, just kind of circling back to teenage angst, like his inability to do the thing that he most wanted to do, and like that has to be so frustrating,
Yeah. And then so they end up going back home, and that's the end of that Charlie story.
And it seems like he's like, oh, that was better in my head. Sort of thing.
Yeah, he's like, that was pretty embarrassing, but look where we are. Yeah. So in between these stories we kind of talked about, we get a little bit more of the principal who gets immediately crapped on. You get Charlie psychiatrist who gets sent down the river, specifically by Charlie asking if he's ever eaten his wife out. That's like a huge part of this. Him making the psychiatrist feel uncomfortable. Him trying
to belittle the man who's like psychoanalyzing him. He's like, no. Let's turn this back on you now.
And there's a good back and forth between them, though, of where the psychiatrist is getting in his head a little bit, and then he'll, basically threaten to kill someone. That's how he gets out of it. So throughout this, like Charlie, when he feels like the authorities getting a little bit of an upper hand on him, he will threaten to kill someone. He does allow someone to go to the bathroom and come back on their own volition.
Right. That was also surprising, but it kind of goes to the idea that the kids start to realize, the group of the class starts to realize that they're in it together. And that they kind of become like an extension of Charlie as the story goes along.
And I agree. I agree with you. So, they call up the sniper to take Charlie out. They don't want to say anything. This is what's happening on the other end, outside of the classroom. Earlier, when I was talking about Charlie taking the gun out of his locker, he took the padlock with him, put it in his front pocket. The sniper aimed for his chest, hits Charlie. Charlie goes down. Everyone thinks he's dead. He thinks he's dead. He thinks he's dying. Apparently, it was one of those Schley locks. He can shoot
Like
a bullet through.
just a really, really, those older style padlocks.
And this is where we get the introduction of the fact that he's the actual narrator from a mental institution, essentially, of that he saw this on this commercial on TV of someone shooting one of these padlocks, and it triggered all these memories to the point where he vomited. So that's where we get this tie-in of like wrapping this thing up of like who is who and what's going on.
Yeah. But Charlie doesn't die, and everybody ends up getting out of the situation okay, except for our boy Ted.
Yeah, so when Charlie's done getting it on, when everyone's told their story, Ted's at his breaking point. He's trying to leave, and the rest of the class, they just beat this poor man to within an inch of his life. They just beat Ted. Ted's the one that wouldn't give up his story. He gives up. He calls his mom a bitch, basically, because she cheated on his dad, and there's a tumultuous late relationship there, but he never gives up a story, and then he goes back on calling his mom a bitch and apologizes for it, and he's just trying to I think the thing is that it's the way he presents himself. He's like better than everyone else, even after they've told this story.
I think he can't come to terms with the being seen as less than perfect.
Yeah, less than anyone else in this class.
Yeah.
And so wraps it up. Charlie puts the gun down, gets arrested, takes us to the end of the novel. And that kind of leads us to the thoughts, I guess. Like, how'd you think about this book? Where would you put this in a list of Stephen King books? Is this a must read?
For me, it's not a must read, and I'm happy that I read it, but also I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. It would be in the bottom 10 of my Stephen King books for sure. It's just it doesn't feel as cohesive as many other Stephen King books and even other Bachman books for that matter.
Yeah, I tend to love a lot of the other, like I love Road Work, and I really love The Long Walk, and Running Man to some extent. Running Man I'm excited to see whatever they do with that film, because as much as I love Arnold Schwarzenegger, there's so much more that can be done with that story. It's so good.
That was I'm pretty sure that the Arnold iteration of that is in title only. It's a kind of a totally different story, that one is, whereas the new one that's coming out is a more faithful telling of what the written work is,
which is cool because it's got like a Blade Runner feel to it. So if you like Blade Runner, if you never read The Running Man, read The Running Man. It's great. It's a good read. So yeah, this one, as far as Bachman books go, probably at the bottom tier of my list. I thought I liked it more than I did reading it 15 years ago or however long ago that would have been, going back to it, there's obviously holes in Stephen King as a writer. There's things that are great. You can see the greatness that is Stephen King, but there's also things like where there's one chapter where he uses the word demure and demurely 17 times.
This is true. Like he's like I said earlier, he's not at the height of his writing powers just yet at this point. This is still a very young man who is talented, but hasn't quite figured out how to structure the story together as well as he will later on.
Now, I will say, all of that being said, given a choice of like reading this coming of age story to some extent versus a lot of the crap that gets filtered on Netflix now as coming of age dramas or Hulu, I would rather read this again.
Yeah, no, I'm not by any means saying that if you're a fan of Stephen King, check this book out. It's worth a read, and it's not very long. But it's just not his strongest work for sure.
I will say the Audible version or the Internet Archive audiobook is really, really well done narration wise.
I like the reader, the gentleman, the voice actor that reads it is it's got a good voice for that story.
Yeah, and I guess that's Rage, man. A book Stephen King would rather you not read, but one that still people talk about loudly from our basement.
It's still out there, so check it out if you want. It might be a little tricky to find your way to the story, but like Chris is saying there, you can go to the Internet Archive and listen to it, or find a used copy inside the Bachman books.
And I think that wraps us up for the first episode of Bachman's Basement. Tune in next time where we talk about The Long Walk. Chris, say goodbye to the good people.
All right. Well, thank you for listening. Again, I'm Chris Clawson. And hope everybody has a good week. We'll see you again next week.
Yeah, see you again next week. And I'm Chris Patton signing out.